Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US election special, another one. It's the election tomorrow, so of course I am flooding the information spaces with my own thoughts, as I have many, and there is a lot to talk about. We're going to start with the Puerto Rican situation, Madison Square Gardens again, take that on to see if there's been an effect on the Puerto Rican electorate, and then look at polls and what we can judge as having happened over the last few days, week or so, in terms of poll adjustments. Now, a new Univision, so to remind those people, of course, there was a situation where Tony Hinchcliffe, comedian at the Madison Square Garden, myriad speakers, there's a 6-hour telethon really, ending in Trump's speech, but most of them, well, many of the speakers were pretty skating close to the edge in terms of taste. There was a lot of fascistic rhetoric coming out, but one of the jokes that Tony Hinchcliffe told was claiming that Puerto Rico was a floating island of garbage, and then you had the situation where there was this, I think, Zoom call or something where Joe Biden said the only thing that's garbage are Trump supporters, and then there was an argument over whether he meant the people speaking before Trump or all of Trump's supporters, sort of like a deplorables thing. And there was a lot of pearl clutching as if, oh, this is terrible, we're so offended, even though Madison Square Gardens, the entire lineup have been pretty offensive, and Trump has repeatedly called Democrats scum, round them up with the army, so on and so forth, enemy within. So it's kind of a lot of pearl clutching, but the issue initially was the garbage thing. Then Trump got dressed up in a garbage man outfit and struggled to get into a garbage vehicle. And everyone was like, I can sort of see why. No, actually, I can't really see what you're doing there. What's the metaphor here? Are you cleaning out the garbage? In which case you're cleaning out your own supporters because Joe Biden called them garbage? That's weird. Are you clearing out Puerto Ricans because they're garbage because your guys have said that it's got their garbage, so in which case that's really offensive. Like, the metaphor didn't quite make sense, so lots of people saying that was a bit of a silly thing to have done. And then you've got people coming to his rallies dressed in bin bags and garbage outfits, and you're thinking, oh, I don't know that it's really landed particularly well. But anyway, there's that as well. So a new Univision poll. So these Latino media outlet, TV stations, etc., Univision poll of Latino voters in Pennsylvania. So there are something like 470,000 Puerto Rican voters, Puerto Rican people of Puerto Rican connection in Pennsylvania. Not so many of them will be voters, of course, but a significant, it's one of the largest, I think, outside of Florida, Puerto Rican populations. And of course, that's the battleground state. So if you are saying things that are deeply offensive towards Puerto Ricans and by extension Latinos, then actually you've got some issues right across the country, but particularly in Pennsylvania. So this new Univision poll of voters in Pennsylvania, Latino voters, has found that Trump's racist rally has had a substantial impact, says Mac McDermott. 88% heard the joke about Puerto Rico. So most of the community, or most of the people surveyed, had heard about this. 67% saw it as a sign of Trump's racism. So 2/3 of people saw it as racist and that Trump is racist. And Harris is leading 64-30 amongst Latinos. This has been an absolute gift for Harris. So this Univision Pennsylvania poll, Latino voters moving to Kamala Harris and don't like being called garbage. Quote, over half of the Latinos surveyed indicated that the rally remarks influenced their likelihood of supporting Trump, making them more likely to vote for Harris. Interesting quote at the end here. Where did I see it? I think it's in here. Anyway, let's read these second two paragraphs. The survey revealed that Pennsylvania Latino voters have significant awareness of specific remarks made at the rally. 69% of respondents found comments such as referring to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage to be more racist than humorous. Only 17% of respondents viewed the remarks as intended jokes rather than serious commentary, suggesting that Trump's attempts to appeal to Latino voters may be undermined by the offensive language employed by speakers at his events. Among Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, a group particularly affected by the remarks made at the rally, 71% reported that even if intended as a joke, these comments suggest that there is racism within the Trump campaign. These findings highlight the importance of being sensitive to cultural respect and indicative that dismissive rhetoric towards Latino communities can affect voting decisions. Interesting there. There's another quote somewhere else that we'll go to next that I think gives you an indication of some of the thoughts of Latino voters. Here's the one I was thinking of. So, as Matt Binder says, thought this was going to happen. They really thought the Biden garbage quote was going to be something. So the retaliation from the Republicans was that, Joe Biden's made a massive gaffe, and that gaffe, they tried to highlight that as being worse than the initial Madison Square Garden comments, and of course it didn't really hit. It didn't really catch on, but way more people saw the garbage joke about Puerto Rico at Trump's rally. So when Trump pulled his garbage truck stunts, some thought he was doubling down on that, and that goes back to what I was saying. It's like the metaphor didn't quite work. So what was he trying to say? This is absolutely fascinating. So Huffington Post spoke with several Puerto Rican voters outside of the Seatown supermarket in Bethlehem, South Side, across the street from the Puerto Rican Beneficial Society. Nilsa Vega and Nida Pacheco of Hellertown, a borough south of Bethlehem, both said they'd never voted before, but Hinchcliffe's remarks were the reason they planned to vote for Harris on Tuesday. So the question is, has that done damage to the Trump campaign such that people who weren't going to vote are now going to vote for Harris, and people that were going to vote for Trump are now going to switch their votes to Harris? So one of them is a 2-point gain, as in it's a zero-sum game. If you don't vote for Trump but do vote for Harris, and you were going to vote for Trump, he not only loses one vote, but Harris gains one. So it's a 2-point gain. And people who weren't going to previously vote voting for Harris is a 1-point gain. Each of these is problematic for Trump because both of them are really wanting to win, in this case, Pennsylvania. So that quote, that hit the spot right there, Vega said. They keep saying, he's only a comedian. It still hurts. Pacheco saw Trump's decision to pose in a garbage truck at a campaign stop in Wisconsin the following day as an additional insult. So they didn't quite get the reference to Biden because they maybe hadn't heard what Biden had said, or just didn't quite get what Trump was trying to do. And so they attached it to the Hinchcliffe remarks and thought it was doubling down on that. So, quote, if he didn't have nothing to do with it, what's he doing in that garbage truck? Pacheco asked. Wow. And then Fox here, this Puerto Rican group in Pennsylvania was undecided, but they're now firmly voting for Kamala Harris.
But one thing that does seem to be helping, according to a canvasser knocking on doors in the Puerto Rico neighborhood here in Philadelphia, is that insult calling Puerto Rico an island of garbage.
That group that was undecided is now firmly voting for Kamala Harris. And there's even some soft Harris Trump support that we've seen that have switched because of the comments and the reaction and his lack of a strong rebuke.
But one thing
so that's really interesting. So saying there are some soft Trump voters who are going over to Harris, and there are others who were undecided going to Harris. And what Trump didn't do, because he's not very good at this, is contrition. He didn't come out and apologize and say, that sucked, that was a ridiculous statement. He came out and sort of half-assed, bodged around the idea that this guy is more distanced himself, said he doesn't really speak for me type thing, rather than say, I'm really sorry, that sucked, what an idiot, oh my goodness, what a mistake, we didn't vet them close enough, I do apologize, we should have vetted those speeches closer, etc., etc. He didn't do that, and as a result, Puerto Ricans have seen that lack of apology, and they're not happy. So there you go. And as Republicans Against Trump says, Nilsa Vega and Nadel Pacheco, who we just heard about from Hellertown, a borough south of Bethlehem, both said they had never voted before, but Hinchcliffe's remarks were the reason they plan to vote for Harris on Tuesday. And as this source says, thank you, Tony Hinchcliffe. Now, I think there will be some people that look back on this election, if Harris does win, there will be many who will blame Tony Hinchcliffe. He could be a fall guy for this, because actually that was a bit of a shot in the foot. That was an own goal, a really serious own goal in the closing week, right? That was part of the closing arguments stage of the campaign for Trump, and he said something that could be seen as a source of losing Pennsylvania, and losing Pennsylvania could be seen as a source of losing the election as a whole, if that happens, right? There's a lot to answer for that chap. Now, I think actually women voters are going to be just as important, but this is incredibly problematic for the Trump campaign. Here we have another undecided Latino voter in Nevada.
Anything different from the last time we were here?
A lot.
Saros is now voting Harris, and he says the racist insults at the weekend Trump event exploded on social media, triggered listener calls, texts, emails.
That alone flipped a lot of people that were going to go for Trump now saying, hey, maybe I'm not too sure.
So he's saying that that's flipped a lot of people from Trump over to Harris, or maybe undecided.
And maybe I'm going, with Harris. The rhetoric, whether directly from, the candidate or not, it's kind of scary, especially, for Latinos here in Vegas, specifically, my Mexican people.
He says, he doesn't know who allowed those speakers to speak at his rally.
Oh, that's BS.
That's BS.
That's BS.
Anything different from the last time?
So there you go. This is having an effect, such that you even see adverts like this. So this is an advert saying, Puerto Ricans in the US, you put Trump in the garbage, paid for by a pack there, Coconut Brat Pack. So it is giving ammunition to adverts that are really going to play on that and will play very, very well, you would think, with the Puerto Rican communities wherever that is playing. Now, as I mentioned, one response by Republicans has been to wear garbage stuff to rallies. We saw Trump doing that himself, actually. But I agree with the Lincoln Project here. This is how the MAGA movement is dying, like a bad club when the lights come on. Empty seats and stragglers in trash bag dresses and maxi pads on their ears, dancing to the few songs that Trump could get licensing to play. Interesting. By the way, there's a lot of humorous analysis that they keep playing Village People. And that song particularly is to do with sort of getting gay sex, I believe, at the YMCA. Although I don't know, I've never looked that closely at the lyrics, but I saw an analysis of the lyrics. It's like, oh, okay. And it's just hilarious that that's the one. That's the song that Trump is dancing to. And that's the one they play at every rally. If there's a deep irony, and I have a feeling that Village People are like, yeah, they can play that because they don't appear to realise what's going on. Like 5 people dressed up in the garb that they are clearly in that era was very very obvious. But anyway, there you go. This chap here, I think, signifies that it's just I don't know, it just looks a bit cheap and tawdry and really I don't know, it's a little bit desperate, isn't it? I don't know, maybe I'm overanalyzing things there. And then I've already done a whole thing about rallies, but apparently, if this can be believed, this is North Carolina, the morning before the election. So today, Donald Trump is on stage in 90 minutes' time in a 7,600-seater stadium, which is not the biggest place. And there are no huge crowds outside, and people are still walking in. I've never seen this at a Trump rally in a red state. So this is the sort of place where you would expect to see huge crowds, and yet there is nothing there. It's absolutely incredible. Really surprising. Oops. And moving on to the next thing. And then, and I know I keep talking about rallies and whether people are turning up or not, but it's interesting that here we've got someone dressed in the garbage suit again, or like a high vis jacket, that kind of same gag. It's the day before the election. Trump is in the only swing state he won in 2020, and there are empty seats in the arena. Don't listen to Trump's words. The Trump campaign is playing defense and are worried they'll lose. You're piecing these things together, but I take it back to these Puerto Ricans here, or the Puerto Rican, not these Puerto Ricans, but Puerto Ricans in general and Latinos in general, and think that this is nothing but an own goal for the Trump campaign, and they must be absolutely incandescent with rage at what really Tony Hinchcliffe did and what they did, and they sanctioned that. Like, apparently they vetted the jokes and they actually scrapped an even more offensive joke. So this is on the campaign as a whole, not just on Tony Hinchcliffe, but they are going to rue that moment and that Madison Square Garden rally. Now you've got, moving on to sort of polls, you've got Anthony Scaramucci, who worked for 11 days with Trump, the Trump administration. He works with Katty Kay on Arrested Politics US, does a very good job. Interestingly, he's working as a surrogate for the Harris campaign. I mean, this is a lifelong Republican, basically, now very much in a Harris camp, and he's doing a really good job. He's getting out and door knocking, but also working, in the media an awful lot to support the Harris campaign. He says the meltdown is about to begin. They have figured out how bad things are, which I think is correct, because you're starting to see things like this. So the vibe shift is out of control. This is red line politics. So one of these kind of YouTube channels and whatnot that is, or sources that is pro-Republican, now giving a final 2024 map that has Harris winning 270 to 268. That is phenomenal. So we have the Rust Belt northern states up there, actually, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in the Harris bucket with. Well, that's all they need, really. It's all about Pennsylvania, and if Harris has Pennsylvania, then and Nebraska's second district, then that is the win. So they are going with that, and you're thinking, goodness me, people are beginning to turn around. You've got Trafalgar here, who was a massive Republican pollster, saying Harris is in a general, Wisconsin poll, Harris 48.2, up 1.2, where the last poll had Trump up 0.2. And you're thinking, okay, Trafalgar's now starting to say some of these battleground states are trending towards the Democrats. Really, really interesting. Now, Rory Stewart from the Rest of Politics UK version, so the original one, he's a Conservative politician that, along with Alistair Campbell, who's Labour, run that Rest of Politics UK podcast. Is very, very good. He's for a long time said it will be a fairly comfortable win for Harris, because his read is this. Kamala, and this is not new, hats off to him, because I agree with him, but he has said this for some time. Kamala Harris will win comfortably because Biden's administration has been solid. Trump's lost ground since 2016. The young black male votes which Trump needs didn't turn out in 16, 18, 20 or 22. And by the way, polls are looking like they're not turning out again for Trump. In fact, the MSNBC poll had Harris winning black men, I think, the black vote by 87%, which is above what Biden had. So there's this idea that there was some leakage of the black vote. It doesn't look like it's happening. Young women like Kamala and they vote. And ignore the polls, they're herding after past misses. And this is something we've heard a lot about, which is the polls are herding, and you've got a lot of Republican pollsters as well, much more than Democratic pollsters. Fascinating stuff. Stewart goes on to say, and bear in mind this is a Conservative politician who is, he is more of your classic Conservative in the UK, your old school Conservative. He's actually pretty moderate. I really like Rory Stewart. But he says here, Conservative leaders who back Trump should be ashamed. And he's talking mainly about British Conservative MPs. They are abandoning the very values which were once the core of conservatism, betraying the very idea of constitutional government, prudence in policy, and simple decency, and they're also backing a loser. Now, he's saying that in response to the embrace of Trump by senior Tory figures in the UK, as according to City AM, shows just how removed the party is from the British electorate, writes James Chappert in today's notebook. So this is the idea that, interestingly, the British Conservative Party has moved to the populist right, which has formed a split, and it was doing that in response to Reform UK that started up with Nigel Farage, and it had this crisis of identity, really, where it had a chance after the disastrous last elections, where basically Reform split the party. They either try and go back to the centre ground, sort of where Rory Stewart is, or they veer off to the right where Reform is and try and retake Reform, but lose that centre ground. And they've done the latter. Badenoch, or Bad Enoch, Badenoch is the new leader of the Conservative Party, and she has veered very much to the right, real populist, so anti-immigrant movement that has consumed the Tory party in the UK. And with that, there's this embrace of a Trumpian form of, I wouldn't even say conservatism, because that's actually what Rory Stewart is saying. It's not a conservatism, it's a kind of populism. And he's railing against the movement in some of the leaders in the British Conservative Party. He goes on to say, Rory Stewart, in answer to Andrew Neil, who's very much a conservative commentator in the UK, saying the polls, Andrew Neil basically says the polls are neck and neck. They are really tight, really, really tight. They were a tie and now they're even closer type thing. Rory Stewart says journalists would like the US race to seem as close as possible. It suits their appetite for suspense and Andrew Neil's desire to prod the establishment. But this won't be a close race decided by a couple of thousand votes. He is wrong. So Andrew Neil says there will just be a couple of thousand votes that decides this over a number of different states. And that was kind of the received idea. But I think there has been this movement surge towards Kamala Harris. And arguably, it was always kind of there, that the polls were just incorrect. They were herding together. They were afraid to break for Harris because there had been two times in a row, two presidential races in a row, 2016 and 2020, they undercounted the Trump vote. And as a result, the polls didn't want to do that and be seen to be wrong three times in a row. And they therefore just show that they're just rubbish, essentially, and not worth the time and effort. So that's a strong rhetoric from Stewart. He is wrong and Kamala Harris will win. It is not as close as those polls have been telling us, so Stewart believes. I actually think that's true as well. I think that Harris will win. The question is by how much. I think she will at least squeak past. It's either going to be very close or somewhat not so close. I honestly don't think Trump will win at the moment. I think all the indicators are not looking good for Trump. That's possibly why he's sort of down in the doldrums. So before we look at a few polls, it's worth taking a look at this. So we have Trump having a little bit of a cheating moment there, looking over at the polling booth. I can't believe that you can have polling booths that are so easy to look. You've got him and his son, Eric Trump, were caught peeking at their wives' ballots. Don't they trust their wives? Women, don't let anyone intimidate you about who to vote for. Absolutely incredible. That just is not a good visual, that one, especially his son. I mean, that's as obvious as you like. Goodness me. Right, now let's get on to polling. So Pennsylvania is on track for a major Republican victory, says Elon Musk. The gap between 2024 and 2020 is now over 600,000, which is almost 10% of the electorate. And I don't really understand. He's talking about the delta between 2020 and 2024 votes Republican to Democrat, but I don't understand where that data is coming from. Someone says there are more early Republican votes in 2024 than in 2020 because Trump told his entire base not to vote early in 2020. It's not on track for a major Republican victory, but you already know that. Just brings up, I don't quite know what that graph is doing, but it does bring up the subject of early votes and Republicans coming out early in some states and confounding some of the thinking, which was that it's the Democrats that vote early. Of course, that's only a relatively recent thing from the 2020 election where you had the pandemic and it was the Democrats that did early voting, but the Republicans kind of two fingers up to the pandemic, don't care about getting close to people, that kind of anti-pandemic regulation thing where we're going to vote in person on the day and stand in queues next to people, etc., etc. Democrats are far more cautious about what to do in terms of voting, and were much more readily up for voting early by mail, absentee ballot, etc., etc., or vote by mail. So this then led to people believing that the Democrats just vote early as this thing. the Republican campaign and Trump himself realized that that was a problem, and actually they needed to spread out their votes. They needed to get the vote out early. So this campaign, he's been actually advocating for people to vote early. In fact, he was also advocating at one point to vote early and in person, double the vote, even though it's cheating, and they'll sort it out anyway. Like, he was literally, as I shared a video with you some time back, literally advocating for cheating. Incredible stuff. But anyway, so he's been advocating, the campaign's been advocating for early voting, and the Republicans have been coming back out in force to vote early. I say back out in force because they've previously done that. Depends what state you're talking about, but it's not unheard of for the Republicans to vote early. So when there have been these early voter shifts, the term that people use, like Dave Trotter at Voting Trend, talks about cannibalization. So actually what they're not doing is enthusing new voters to come out for Republicans, and I think the data supports this in terms of these are likely previous voters who are coming out and voting early, but otherwise would have voted on election day. So they're cannibalizing from their election day votes and putting it in the early vote. Whereas what you really want is to get new voters who have never voted before to come out and vote. You want to get Democratic voters to come out and vote for Republican, or vice versa, and so on and so forth. And the idea is that actually the early Republican surge that we saw in some states at the beginning of the early vote, and I don't think it's really held up either, wasn't so much this kind of Republicans are going to win thing, but they're stealing their own later vote for earlier voting. Now, in terms of legality, we are going to see so many challenges to the legal system, to all sorts of states' voting processes and whatnot. After losing a lawsuit in state court, the RNC and Georgia GOP, so the Republican National Committee and the Georgia Republican Party, are suing a federal court to challenge mail-in ballot voters turn in by hand in some counties. But what's interesting is they're challenging these ballots in 7 counties that are Democratic leaning. There are Republican leaning counties in Georgia offering the same service. So they are challenging this service in certain Georgia counties for being kind of unconstitutional or not what they want. But they're only challenging that service in the Democrat-leaning counties, and they're not going to the Republican-leaning counties where the same service is being offered. It's obvious that they're not interested in challenging things legally that they see as problematic voting mechanisms, or that are truly intrinsically unwarranted or unconstitutional, whatever it is, whatever rationale they have. Their rationale is that this is a mechanism that favours the Democrats here, but not over here. So we're going to challenge it here, but not there. It's entirely disingenuous. Right. Now, this idea that the polls have been herding and that, in fact, they've been pretty inaccurate. And also you can talk about betting markets not being accurate and being gamed. You've got Nate Silver, who was 538 previously, now has his own system and model and whatnot. He is now projecting a Kamala Harris win. So lots of people, this is a huge reversal. Lots of people were talking about how, Nate Silver's saying this, Nate Silver's saying that. But as the polls have been switching recently, as people have been recognizing that they've been herding, they're starting to change their weighting. We'll come on to that in a second. Nate Silver's model is sort of reflecting this and seeing some of the early voting data, seeing some of the polls that are coming out. He's now put Harris back in the lead at 270 to 267. That is phenomenally important. So this idea that the polls have been a bit problematic has got Rachel Bitterkoffer, the poll whisperer, to say when Republicans lose on Tuesday, they'll be shocked because all the polls they paid for promised them they'd win. The idea that they had 26 polls that were Republican pollsters dropping in 1 week, and one Democratic pollster and like 35 or whatever it was, non-partisan polls. She said that's a feature, not a bug. You flood the zone, you use this flood the zone strategy, and Republicans are going to have their perception skewed because they flooded the zone. They're victims of their own kind of techniques here. They need people to expect to win to get them to commit felonies for Trump, she said. So this is Simon Rosenberg talking about the red wave pollsters dropped 17 polls today alone. He said, when was that? Yesterday. So yesterday, Republican pollsters dropped 17 polls, at least 75 since last Sunday, a majority of polls in the final week. Trafalgar and Insider Advantage have each released 30 plus polls since late August. Emerson poll on to counter Seltzer in Insider Advantage in Iowa, today was paid for by Real Clear Defense. So Emerson poll released a poll straight after Seltzer's poll came out to try and redress the balance. As folks analyse this ridiculous campaign to influence national narrative about the election and establish predicate for Trump to contest when he loses, most important things to consider are they would only be doing this if they knew he was losing. Interesting. And to add to that, Mitchell Research, a Michigan-based pollster with exclusively Republican political clients, so a Republican pollster, and they are 2.4 out of 3 on a rating from 538, so not a bad pollster. You almost never see a pollster publicly adjust their sample composition or weighting like this. Dude got spooked by something. So what happened? Actually, originally MIRS News thought that Steve Mitchell revamped the sample after the poll from last weekend showed Trump +1 and Rogers +2 in Michigan. He now shows Harris and Slotkin +2. It seems clear now that we are under-sampling women and African Americans and the city of Detroit, he says. And they correct themselves here. He said actually did not resample the new poll that now shows the Harris and Slotkin up. He acknowledges Detroit, women and African Americans undersampled, and every poll we conducted, including this one, was weighted exactly the same. So it looks like it could be a weighting thing. So the reason he said he did not sample based on the demographic changes among African Americans and women is that he would have been accused of putting his finger on a scale and finding a way to make it look as though Harris was doing better. He used his same weights on the data to demonstrate there was real movement to Harris from Trump. So in other words, it looks like fudging the statistics by changing the weighting to say, oh, look, actually Harris is doing better than we had thought. Because it turns out that when you look at all these other polls and they conclude rather differently to yourself, or you're starting to see more and more data like early voting data, then there's suddenly a little bit of an impetus to either move away from the herd or for the whole herd to accept actually that the original polling was somewhat was weighted somewhat dubiously. Now, this is why the Iowa poll that I've been talking about a lot recently, Ann Seltzer, she doesn't use these complex weighting strategies or mechanisms, whereby you get your sample and then you give different people weighting based on what it looked like in 2020. That was a thing about Ann Seltzer. She took a data that's quite clean and she's forward looking and says, well, actually, what does this tell us about which is what people believe now? That's what they believe, not this is what they believe. But if we take that through a lens of 2020, then it will look slightly different from actually what we're getting here. And we're saying that actually in 2020, Asian people of this demographic voted a little bit more. So we're going to put a little bit more weighting on this and blah, blah, blah. Rather than getting that from your selection and just letting the data speak for itself. So that's how I understand the difference is between the Ann Seltzer polls and a lot of these other polls that are kind of backward reflecting, really. You've got Ryan Fournier here, so in the Republican camp, saying, I just got some recent polls sent to me. Holy crap, we are going to win this. People do not want Kamala Harris. This is incredible. Then it was community noted to say the OP posted and later deleted an email screenshot of the recent polls that he was sent, which was exposed as both fake, so those recent polls weren't saying that, and sent to the OP by himself. So he sent himself an email of fake polls and then put out this thing, I've got some recent polls sent to me. Just gives you an indication that people are creating narratives. They are trying to pull the wool over, not everyone, but some people are trying to pull the wool over others' eyes, either their own camp or the other camp. Betting markets and polls that are skewed to make their own clients feel good about stuff, or it gives them some. Was it Simon Rosenberg was talking about how polls are often or pollsters are often just really interested in they're not interested in the data and what it tells you. They're interested in just getting further contracts. So it's like just a business where you're like, okay, if we do these polls, blah, 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 put this weighting on it, come out with this answer. If they like that answer, then they're going to hire us again. And so they're quite often just looking to give people what they want so that they keep getting the contracts. Swan Marcus here says it's insane that 3 right-leaning pollsters showed up out of nowhere to poll Iowa within 3 days of Seltzer completing her fieldwork on October the 31st. Emerson, but apparently that was funded by Republicans. SoCal, which has got incredibly dubious provenance. If you want to see that, go and look at Voting Trends, Dave Trotter's video on SoCal, just completely taking SoCal to pieces. That insider advantage, which is not held in high esteem either. How blatant do you have to make this? Insider advantage has Trump up 7 points in Iowa. So Ann Seltzer is a really good pollster with really good provenance. Doesn't have a team. You know, she doesn't have a horse in the race. You know, she's not a Republican pollster or a Democrat pollster. She does a pretty decent, methodologically speaking, poll that finds Harris up 3, and then a couple of days later, oh look, we've got these polls. Now, it's the other thing I forgot to mention actually in my Iowa poll analyses is that she's really good at Iowa because she is in Iowa, and Ann Seltzer only does Iowa polls, and she goes out and surveys these people and gets the results and puts minimal weighting on it, and is fairly accurate, or very accurate. It's worth remembering that a lot of other pollsters often do state polling, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, by modelling. They don't always, or indeed often, take polls in a state. They'll have a national poll, and from the national poll, they'll extract state polls and do some modelling they'll take from other places to hopefully give them an understanding of that state from their national data. And so it might be that state has more black people, or more this, or more that, and then they'll model that thing and say, right, this is what this state thinks. And actually it's not derived necessarily from the state itself, but from modeling from national data. Whereas Ann Seltzer is in Iowa and does that survey from within Iowa, asks the questions in ways that Iowan people understand, as in, like, you know, Dave Trotter was talking about this, the way you phrase things, like it speaks to people. And if you are from that place, then you are going to be creating a survey that is going to be bespoke to those people, and it's going to have a better chance of being more accurate. So really interesting. The reaction to the Iowa poll, but also we need to be very skeptical about their findings given what the provenance of these pollsters is and their methodologies that they may or may not have used. Now, Christopher Boozy, who has some interesting analyses on polls, says Donald Trump is about to go through some things, rather like Anthony Scaramucci was saying there. Now, this is in response to the Harris campaign official in Pennsylvania says their volunteer team is averaging 2,000 door knocks per minute across the state on Saturday as of 12:54. So that's your average during typical door knocking hours. That's absolutely insane. And there is this prevailing sense that the ground game for the Democrats is excellent, and the ground game for the Republicans is almost non-existent. So if you're trying to piece all these bits of the jigsaw together and say, okay, polls are looking like they're surging towards Harris, or, you know, early voting data is looking good for Harris specifically in Michigan and Wisconsin, and not too bad in Pennsylvania. In fact, in North Carolina, it looks like it's pretty good at the moment, and Georgia as well has come back. So the early voting data is looking particularly good for those 5. Arizona is a bit tricky. Nevada might come through. it's interesting that the independents, or the MPAs, the non-party affiliates, are potentially going to play a massive part, particularly in North Carolina, and they are skewing Democrat. So it's thought. So anyway, back to Pennsylvania. If you're doing 2,000 door knocks a minute and the other side are basically doing nothing, then you've got an advantage. And I've heard so many anecdotes of people changing people's minds, really getting a sense of what's going on the ground. Pennsylvania mail-in ballots have returned by party registration. Democrats 990,189, Republicans 583,791, other 203,039. That's going to be important. And the buffer is now 417,000 on party, but also we cannot expect an oversized part of the independent vote. We can expect, an oversized part of the independent vote. We knocked 807,000 doors on Saturday alone, looking good, keep pushing. So this is the idea that, one, the early votes are looking good for Democrats in general in Pennsylvania. Two, from what they're finding out on the ground, others are, the non-party affiliates and whatnot, are likely to vote Democrat, or at least skew Democrat. And then you've got the leakage from Republican to Democrat, and then you've got the vote on the day, which apparently is still going to look, they're predicting going to look fairly good as well. It's quite a vote on the day, although it's a lot of votes they've already taken in. Vote on the day states, as far as I remember. So some Democrats are quite upbeat about Pennsylvania. Others are very much who could go either way. CNN has said voters tomorrow is projecting record youth voting totals. That's extraordinary. 2022 youth vote projections. Michigan up 221%, Pennsylvania up 102%, North Carolina up 53%. Some of these figures are absolutely stunning, and the sense is that those youth voters are more likely to skew Democrats again. So much polling going on. I mean, who do we have here? Rust Belt polling by Research Company just out today, saying Harris up 4 in Michigan, up 4 in Wisconsin, up 1 in Pennsylvania. Those are likely voters as well. So that's pretty. I mean, there's so much. New reporting from Georgia shows women are accounting for 56% of the voters. This is huge for Kamala Harris. So there's a lot of expectations on women, and they are turning out pretty well. I mean, there's loads of these, as I say, polls coming out, but it's about looking at the interesting one. MRP polling is a model that's been used in the UK a lot to do constituency by constituency polling, and it's quite intricate. And talking about Iowa previously, these are much more accurate for individual geographical areas rather than doing a national poll and then trying to extract individual areas from the national poll. Actually, you do this MRP polling. It's a very long name. What does it stand for? Multi blah 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 polling. Anyway, this MRP polling, which is now becoming more and more popular in the US, is showing that Michigan is looking good for Harris, 50 to 46. So she's up 4, up 2 in Nevada. That's very important. Wisconsin, 49. I presume that's to 47. So that's up 2 in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania, up 1. North Carolina, up 1. Arizona, down 2. And Georgia, down 1. And then the Senate is looking fairly good, although he in Montana against John Tester there. That's not looking good for John Tester. He's an incumbent, but he's been there a long time, and that's one that they're looking at losing. And also Moreno in Ohio is looking good for the Republicans there. On the other hand, the Democrats are hoping to have Osborne, an independent in Nebraska, he will likely caucus Democrat. Could be one to watch out for. It's looking like he's going to win possibly there. And then there are rumors about Florida, Rick Scott losing to Debbie Mercosel. What's her name? Anyway, her and Colin Allred in Texas might win, but there are also people saying they're not looking like they are. So those could be some kind of outside chances, if you like. Now, ABC Ipsos poll, Harris is up 3 nationally. Independents, Harris is up 49 to 44. 7 battleground states, 49 to 46. So independents, you're doing well, and in the battleground states doing well. So some of these polls, as I say, surging, looking good. I'm giving you the ones that are quite well known, ABC, Ipsos, Time, Siena, that have good provenance. There are other polls that say opposite to this, that have Trump looking good, but they are more dubious, or like Atlas Intel, there's a lot out from them, just dropping all sorts of polls. But I'm not going to go through them all, and those ones are just less reliable. Here we have the New York Times Siena poll. Among the 8% of voters who said they had already decided their vote, she wins a group 55 to 44. That's huge. Roughly 40% of those surveyed across the 7 background states said they had voted. Ms. Harris wins those voters by a margin of 8 percentage points. Absolutely incredible. So, some really good results certainly in some of the states. As you can see there, Arizona not looking as good. So Arizona is the one that most people are saying is looking better for Trump than for Harris. Nevada has a good ground game. The Harry Reid ground game in Nevada for the Democrats is traditionally very good. Will it come out? Will it come through for election day? We shall see, because that's looked a little bit dodgy so far in the early votes. Now, as I mentioned, in North Carolina, the early vote is done. Mail-in will continue to come with further processing, but this year's early vote hit some milestones. 56% of North Carolinians banked their ballot before Tuesday, for a total of nearly 4.4 million votes cast early. Record of 4.1 million plus in-person early votes. Quite incredible. And that, I think, signifies that there's some excitement down there. The New York Times poll has, in North Carolina general election, Harris up 2. So the last poll was from the 2nd of November. So that's actually really recently. No. That wasn't the last poll. This one's the 2nd of November. Sorry. The previous one, I don't know when the last poll was Trump up 2. Harris is now up 2. So that's a swing of 4 towards Harris, and that's an A-rated poll, the New York Times Siena poll there for North Carolina. So really important. And then the final New York Times Siena poll of Battleground Georgia shows Harris at 87% among black voters. 87% is higher, if I remember correctly, than where Biden was, and this has been shown as well, I think, in the MSNBC poll, double digit above other previous polls, and in line with where Democrats aim to be to have a chance to carry Georgia. So Georgia is now back on the cards for Harris, and there has been this idea that the Democrats are losing those black voters compared to where they were previously, and the same for Latino. Then when you had the Madison Square Garden debacle, you see potentially Latinos coming back, certainly Puerto Ricans in really key places. Be interesting to see how they vote in Florida, because there's a lot of them in Florida, and that could be significant. But Pennsylvania is one that a lot of people have been paying close attention to. And if the blacks aren't drifting away and shifting to Republicans at the rates that were thought, then really the Republicans are relying on white men who are generally low propensity voters, young white men, low propensity voters. That's a demographic they're relying on to get out to vote and to carry them across the line. It just looks pretty unlikely, I'll have to say. Final thing here, while I'm voting Democrat for the first time in my life, why I'm voting Democrat for the first time in my life in a simple meme. This is really, really interesting. And I wonder how many of you feel the same. How many of you are old school centre-right voters, maybe even centrist voters, now find yourself sitting left of centre, not because you've shifted, but because the right has shifted. And I think this just is a wonderful, simplistic diagram here. So 2012, this is this person in 2012. You had the left there. You had me sitting there centre-right. This is not me speaking, JP. This is whoever this is. And then my fellow Conservative sits on the right, just a little bit further to the right? And then in 2016, you got Democrat, me. Oh, I've changed a little bit. I appear to be slightly left of centre because my fellow Conservative has gone quite far to the right and fairly quickly. You think about the Tea Party movement. You think about that then spawned into the MAGA movement, and 2016 was where Trump was then. And then since 2016, and you had the tiki carriers in Charlottesville, and both sidesism of Trump, and you had this Stephen Miller enthused move further to the right, where you are now seeing all sorts of things said at Madison Square Gardens, for example, that you never would have seen 20 years ago. You see the rhetoric has changed, the Overton windows changed, where things are more acceptable to talk about now than they ever have been previously. And me, I haven't changed, says this person. Look, but I'm now even further left of centre. So I appear to be quite leftist, but I'm not really. I haven't changed. I'm old school centre right. It's just that right has gone so far to the right, and that person is an authoritarian fascist who shouts commie at anyone to the left. So now I appear to be a commie, and the person over there is shouting at me saying I'm a commie, but I haven't changed. They have. And meanwhile, the Democrats saying, welcome to the family. We'll have you. Thank you very much. I think that's a really interesting infographic. I'll be interested as to whether that speaks to you at all. And just sort of finally, it's going to be interesting to see whether this comes back and bites them on the arse. So the Harris-Walz campaign are doing something quite risky. They did a risky thing in terms of the practicalities of doing it at the DNC, where earlier on, before the end of the DNC, they did a live feed across from the Democratic National Convention to a Harris-Walz rally, and Harris was walking out live, and they played it on both screens, and they did this live kind of 2 event arena live stream thing where they cross-pollinated. Now they're doing something even more crazy. So pretty awesome that Harris campaign is holding coordinated concerts tomorrow in every single swing state featuring Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, Ricky Martin, John Bon Jovi, Andra Day, Christina Aguilera, Los Tigres del Norte, Sophie Tucker, Sugarland and James Taylor. And they are doing these across 2, 4, 6, 8 different states. And I think they're doing that integration where they're all kind of live with each other for different performers and put it on the big screens. Now, what you hope if you're a part of the Harris-Walz team is that this doesn't all become a damp squib when you end up losing. Like all of these big names, you're like, yeah, that's that confidence you have. Now, are they doing this because actually they've seen the stats and they've seen some of that early data and they are confident enough to say, I think we're going to carry it? Does this tell you of their confidence, or is this something that's been booked in for a long time and they've planned it just hoping they would succeed? I don't know. It is high risk, that's for sure. Now, before I leave you to get your beauty sleep, I am going to just, I meant to include this in a previous video, but just kind of forgot. It's rather worrying when you look at the people lined up for each cabinet, and you look at Kamala Harris. You know, it's got some interesting options, and they are competent people. Even if you're looking at, say, Liz Cheney for a defense position, as a Republican coming into the Democratic cabinet, she is competent, right? She has shown herself to be a woman of great integrity. And you've got Trump saying, well, I'm lining up RFK Jr. is going to be wild on health and protecting women's health care. And you're like, have you seen his past concerning women and the amount of affairs he's had and a bit promiscuous and blah, blah, blah. What's going on there? And then you're like, have you seen everything he says about health is vaccine denialism and fluoride? Just take one thing, and this is who he's going to put in charge of health. Like, if you are not worried about all the other crazy crap that Trump has said, this should worry the crap out of you. He's going to put someone in, like Fox in charge of the hen house. He's going to put RFK in charge of health, and that is just wrong. So RFK is lying. What RFK here is saying, on January the 20th, the Trump White House will advise all US water systems to remove fluoride from public water. Fluoride is an industrial waste associated with arthritis, bone fractures, bone cancer, IQ loss, neurodevelopmental disorders, and thyroid disease. President Donald Trump and the First Lady Melania want to make America healthy again. So that's what he's saying. Now, this is proper like conspiracy theory nonsense. Now, if you're someone that believes fluoride is dangerous, unfortunately, data doesn't support you. So RFK Jr. is lying. 75 plus years of data show fluoride, a natural mineral, prevents tooth decay. Fluoridated water, 0.7 milligrams per litre, 1 million milligrams of water. A 22-pound baby could drink 57 litres of water a day before getting adverse fluoride effects. but to drink 57 litres of water, the baby would have water toxicity after 3.2 cups. In other words, the baby would die of too much water before it even remotely had an issue with too much fluoride. This is just nonsense, and it's dangerous nonsense, and he should not be put in charge of health. It's a shame. There was another one about fluoride here. So just be very careful about, well, don't listen to RFK Jr. essentially, but I'd be really wary as to who Trump is lining up to put in charge. Mike Flynn. To put Mike Flynn in charge of the DOD is insane. The guy is a nut job who is a Russia lover, and that's who he's going to put in charge of, or a Ukraine hater, in charge of the DOD by the looks of it. The picks he has lined up are super, super concerning. This should be there should be a big old warning bell going off for you if you are still a supporter of Trump, knowing that someone like RFK Jr. is going to be in charge of healthcare. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.